What you guys got another used parts build here for you. This one is an i5 processor. It's an i5 4690. There's 1150 socket with 6 megs of cache on here, which is plenty useful for gamers and stuff like that. We've also got the Asus Z97-P motherboard. Got 8 gigabytes of HyperX memory here, and also there is the CPU there. We're going to be putting this all together. Now these i5s are awesome for gamers. They're pretty much good enough today in 2019 just for gaming. And you can see here, the first thing you want to check is the motherboard pins to make sure there's no bent pins on the board. If there is, then you want to send it back. Now also you can see here, this is the chip. It does come with a little tiny triangle in the corner which tells you which way the orientation should be on there. There's a couple of little notches on here as well, and they line up with the socket on the board, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's really easy to put these in. Just line them up and just basically drop that in there. Now I will line these little notches up on the board here just to make sure you don't put it in the wrong way. And if you do that, you're going to end up bending all the pins on the board. So just get that into the location here and give it a little jiggle there. There we go. And that's sitting inside there. And then all I need to do now is pull the cage down here, which is going to lock the CPU into place. Slot that underneath the screw there and pull down the retention lever, and that's pretty much that. Now these are pretty tight, these retention levers on the Intel ones. So once we've got that into position, you can clean this up and we can put some compound on there a little bit later on. So what we want to do now is put the memory in, and of course we've got 4 slots here. They are color coded, which means these are the sequence where the memory goes into place. This would normally be in your user manual. There's a little notch on here, you just have to line these up pretty much. Now this is DDR3 memory, I think it's 1600 megahertz or something like that, something along those lines. Just put these into the slots and then push down on the ends and you should hear a clicking sound, and click that into position. Next up, I'm going to be doing the next one. Now 8 gigabytes is pretty much okay for gamers. It's nice to have 16 gigabytes, but if you've only got 8 gigabytes it should do okay for gaming. So now we've got all this ready here. I'm just going to clean the CPU up and put some compound on. You've got an M.2 slot here which you can use. Now another thing to look out for when buying used parts on market sites is no backplate or no IO shield. Just make sure that they come with your build. This didn't come with a backplate, which means now I have to get a cooler with a backplate included, and this is the Cooler Master one. Now I went with this one because it's got a bit of RGB on there, and I just wanted to give it a bit of bling really. And I'm going to pull this out of the box. Comes with all the screws and mounting plate and back plate and stuff like that that you need, mounting bracket as well, for different types of sockets. So depending on what type of socket you've got, you can use whichever one suits your CPU. So I'm going to fish through these and find the right one in the package and use that for my build. So as I said, there is no back plate on here, so I will need to put the back plate on. Now thankfully this one does come with a back plate, this CPU cooler, so that is always a plus side. So when you're looking for these motherboards, make sure you do have one of these back plates, otherwise you will have to add this onto the cost. And of course you're trying to keep the costs down when you're buying these used parts, because obviously if it's too expensive then it's not worth buying, because you may as well buy new. So the whole idea of using used parts is to keep the cost down as cheap as possible and make sure it's under the cost of what it would cost if you was buying new parts. So you've got the bags of screws here. You can see it just gives you the right type of screws here for the job, and that is the power connector for the RGB. If the board doesn't have an RGB slot on it, you can use the Molex cable that comes in a kit. So I just need to put these little screws inside here, and these will go through the motherboard holes for the back plate. So I'm just going to put all 4 of these in. Once we've got these into place, we can push these through the slots on the board. Now I just need to turn these around so they're in the right position. There we go. And now I can put these locking caps on, and these locking caps are made of plastic, and this stops the little screws coming out of position. So it's a pretty simple mechanism, but it works pretty well. Just have to make sure these are rotated in the right place so they don't slide out. You can see they've got a certain orientation they have to be in to lock them into position. There we go. Pretty straightforward stuff. Okay, so I've got the back plate on and I've got the screws pushed through now, and these are going to have these screws which we can tighten down the cooler onto, and without a back plate you won't be able to do this. So if you do see these online and you haven't got a cooler that supports with a back plate, then you will need to buy one. Now I need to just put these little mounting screws on, and it will give you all the instructions in the user manual for this cooler. It does have RGB on it. Now obviously this board was made before RGB was supported, so if that is the case and you still want to give it a bit of RGB bling, you can. You just need to use the adapter cable that comes in the kit, and I'll show you that in a little bit once we get to that stage. Now another question I get quite a lot is it still viable to use this in 2019? Yes, it is. It still plays games with no problem at all if that's what you're just interested in. Just make sure that you're not overpaying for parts on these used parts, because if you're starting to pay way more than what it's worth, then you may as well build a new system. And of course a lot of the new Ryzen systems will way outperform this old i5. Now it's got a little spanner in here, and I'm just going to tighten these down a little bit. Now don't over tighten these because you can damage the board, so just tighten these down just a little bit until you feel a bit of resistance, and then stop. So next up we need to put the mounting bracket onto the cooler itself, and this is a really simple task as well. I do like this mechanism. It's pretty straightforward. You just have to put the right bracket on and then put one little screw, which is a tiny little screw, and then screw this down. It's that simple. So I'm just going to offer this up and tighten this down. There we go. And then this will allow us to screw it to the actual screws on the board here. So it's a very simple process. Now this cooler is a pretty nice cooler. I do like the look of it. It's got a nice big copper base on the bottom, and it's like a UFO really. It looks the sort of a shape of a UFO. And it's made by Cooler Master, and I just wanted to give it a try to add a bit of bling to the old sort of dated look of the board. It's a chocolate brown sort of colour to the board there. So I'm just going to screw this down. Now we also have to remove this little cover here, and this is a pretty much a schoolboy error. A lot of people forget to remove that, and of course it will cause problems. So make sure you remove that before you start to put the compound on and put this CPU cooler down onto the board here. Now I'm just going to give the CPU a bit of a clean with some isopropanol pad here, and just clean these off just to make sure it's nice and clean. And you can do the CPU cooler as well. Just going to dry that off a little bit. It should dry automatically, but I'm just going to do that just to make sure any remnants of any sort of compound has been removed. Now we can put on our compound. Now whatever compound you want to use, you can buy basically. I'm just going to use this stuff here, which is the stuff I got from China. I've got 2 big tubes of it, and it will do for what I need. That's probably not the best stuff on the market, but it will do for what I need. You've got loads of different types of compound you can choose from. And so I'm going to just put the cooler down now and screw this down. So sit that on there. All we need to do now is tighten down 4 little nuts on top of the screws there. Now this bit was a bit tricky, and I did find it a bit of a tight squeeze underneath there to get my hands under and put the nut on there, but I did manage to do it. I'm just going to do them finger tight first, and then I'm going to tighten them down with the little spanner that comes in the kit. Now you don't want to over tighten these. Just do them till you feel a bit of resistance, and then stop. And this should put enough pressure down onto the CPU so we get good cooling. So you can see already it's starting to come together. Now once we get this into the case, we'll be able to change the RGB on the cooler there. Now obviously this does come with a 4-pin RGB cable, but there's no port for that on the board, so we need to convert that into a Molex and then use a Molex power connector to get RGB there. So I've tightened those down now, and now we've got the cooler onto the board itself. Now I just need to, there's that cable with the 4-pin layout here, or 4 female holes there for the RGB, but it does come with a little cable in the kit, as I said. So I'm just going to undo these cable ties. Now be careful, if you're going to leave these cable ties on, they do have metal in them, and sometimes the metal is showing, and if that touches the board when it's on, you could short the board out. So I prefer to use plastic cable ties and remove those little metal cable ties there. So let's just run the power cable to the CPU header on the board, and also we need the RGB to get RGB display, which I'll do a little bit later on. So next up, we're going to put the IO shield in, and the IO shield should come with the board. Now if it doesn't, you can buy ones that are brand new on eBay. Again, these will cost you around about £6 to £8, or sometimes £10. They come from China, and again, if you do buy these from China, that's just adding to the cost, and just bear that in mind, it's going to cost more money. So the whole idea is to keep this to a bare minimum, so you're not spending too much money on used parts. Now this should just pop into position here. Very simple stuff to do. Now sometimes you don't get these with a board, and you're going to end up with a big gaping hole at the back, which is not ideal. And the little clips you'll see on there, the little metal strands there, they are grounding straps, so you don't bend those out of the way. They should be touching the metal on the motherboard there. So next up, we need to get the motherboard risers onto the case here. Now it does come with some of these on here, but remember this is an old type board, so I just need to make sure that we've got them in the right positions, and I can see they are. So all I can do here now is just line this up and slot this into position here. And then we can just get the screws and tighten this up and screw this down. So it's all coming together. And what we're going to do once we get this down is get the final few parts in and boot this bad boy up. Now again, if you're on a super tight budget, there is some options out there which are brand new parts, which are Ryzen free, with 4 cores, 4 threads, which would be ideal for gaming, and you can pick those up for around about £50. Again, so if you are looking at getting something cheap, it's going to have to be pretty cheap to make it worth doing. Now you can see here we do have a cable here which we need to use, which is an adapter. Now this is for the RGB, so we can get RGB on the cooler itself. So you can see here that is going to plug into the cable here, and then it will convert it into a Molex connector. And I can then tuck that through the top of the case out to the back of the case, where we can then put it into a cable from the power supply. Pretty straightforward stuff. So let me go ahead and get this sorted out. There's a little pin here. You need to put this into the actual connector here. Now there's a couple of little arrows on here, and they need to be lined up to make the RGB work properly. So I'm just going to line these up here. And you should see the 2 little triangles, they should be in line with each other here. And there we go. So I can now have a controller here. This is a controller to actually control the unit as well. So you can tuck that down the back of the case if you want. And you can change all the colours and stuff like that with that little controller there. So I'm just going to poke this through here. So we're going to be putting in the EVGA 600 BQ power supply, which is a 600 watt bronze certified power supply. So all I need to do here is get that put into the case. So here is the power supply, plenty enough power here for what we need. And again, you can use second-hand or used power supplies if you want to. Personally, now again, it's entirely up to you whether you buy new or used. If you can get them cheap enough used, and the whole build comes in at a reasonable price, then it's worth doing. But again, you have to keep an eye on the budget and how much you're actually spending, because obviously if this starts to spiral out of control, which it can do, then the project is a non-viable project to do, and you're going to end up just wasting your money. Well, I guess the $64 million question is, how much are used parts worth and how much should you pay? Well, what you should do is spec out a real sort of budget machine on the same par, if not better, than what you're actually looking to purchase. And if the new PC comes in cheaper than it would cost to buy the used parts, then you know you're paying too much for those parts. It's pretty straightforward stuff, really. And of course, it's return of investment. If you're buying these parts to use and sell, then and make flipping them and make money, then you need to make sure there's enough in it for profit. And again, if there's no profit in it, then all you're doing is using it for content. That's okay as well. But as long as you understand there's a fine line to how much you can really make on these systems. So again, what we need to do here now is just put in the 24 pin onto the board. And I've already got to put in the 4 pin or 6 pin up the top there for the CPU to the board. So I'm going to do that as well. So I'm just going to plug these in here. Now there's no sort of shroud for this case here to hide the power supply. I've got the USB 3.0 cable. This is coming through the side here, so I need to put this into the board as well. And again, this is not going to win any awards for sort of cable management or any sort of prettiness. It's pretty bland and it's pretty old, but it will do the job for a lot of people on a tight budget. Okay, so we've got the cables here. These are the cables for the audio and USB, so I need to put these into the board as well. And it's very hard to record and show this part here, but basically they're normally down the bottom of the board here, and I need to plug those in. And there's USB ones, and there's also the front panel headers here, so I'm showing you here. These need to plug into this area here. And these go into a certain sequence, and you can see I put a diagram on there. I won't be able to show that part because my hand's going to be in the way. Now these are semi-modular power supplies, and these are useful because it means you can use whatever cables that you need to use. And this just keeps down the sort of wadger cables that you can end up with on these sort of builds. So I prefer to use fully modular or semi-modular power supplies. Now we've got a GTX 1060 6GB card here, which we're going to be putting in here, and this will play all the games, all the AAA listed games, no problem at all. Now this will play all the games like Fortnite around about 100 frames per second, probably on Epic 1080p, maybe around about 90 to 100, something like that. And Overwatch, you'll probably get around about 100 and odd frames on there as well. PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds, you can get around about 75 on high settings there, and some ultra settings. Also Rise of the Tomb Raider, around about 90 to 80 frames per second. And again, Battlefield 1, you can probably get around about 70 to 80 frames per second as well. And these all depend on the settings that you set up in the game and the type of monitor you're using. It looks pretty okay for a budget build, and if you're on a tight budget, make sure you keep the prices down and make sure it's a viable project to do. Otherwise, don't bother doing it. Go and get yourself a brand new computer. You're going to be better off in the long run. It's entirely up to you which way you approach it. But if you're looking for just a gaming system, then you want to be looking for 4 cores, 4 threads, AMD or Intel. It's entirely up to you. i5 is a good sort of starting point here. This is a sort of end result that you can expect from something like this sort of build, really. And again, just calculate all how much it's going to cost you to do this sort of thing. Now you can pick these graphics cards up used as well on places like Craigslist, eBay, Facebook Marketplace, and places like that. Gumtree. Just don't pay too much for it, and you should be okay. And you should be able to get yourself a nice, tidy little used system for gaming or whatever it is you want to use it for. Now this is obviously an i5, but if you want to do video editing and stuff like that, try and aim for something like an i7 or something along those lines, and you should be pretty much good to go. It looks pretty nice, I think, for a budget build. And it's a great little PC if you want to get into PC gaming. You can see here Time Spy we've got a benchmark here of 4,207. Now I could show you some gameplay, but take my word for it, it does play these games no problems whatsoever. It's just an i5 at the end of the day. Most i5s will play all modern games no problems whatsoever with the right type of graphics card, so it will play those games. So I just run the Heaven benchmark as well here for you, just to give you the end result of what we got on Heaven benchmark. And again, pretty solid little system really. And the scores here, as you can see, benchmark score of 5,140, frames per second were 122.9. That's a minimum frames per second of 25 and a maximum of 198.6. So not too bad. And overall, a pretty decent score for an old i5 and for a gaming system. Anyway, that's going to be about it. My name has been Brian from briteccomputers.co.uk. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks again for watching and thanks for your continued support. Bye for now. Now, if you haven't subscribed yet, hit the big red subscribe button on my YouTube channel and hit the bell notification button next to that to be notified when we upload new videos.